Most Americans didn't understand what mass deportation means. You can ask somebody, do you support mass deportation and getting rid of criminals in our communities? Yes, I don't want to feel unsafe in my community, most Americans would say. But if you follow up and you say, do you support your favorite restaurant owner who runs the pancake house you've been going to with your kids every weekend, being pulled out of work and never returning, you'd say no. The point here is, what are the facts that are being presented and how close are everyday Americans to actually what's happening on the ground?
Taking center stage today is Nayna Gupta, Policy Director at the American Immigration Council. Gupta works to expose abuses in the Trump administration's crackdown on migrant communities, including ICE raids across the United States. She's a strong critic of migrant detention facilities like the notorious Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. Gupta joins us to talk about her fight for humane migration policies and justice for migrant communities. Nayna Gupta, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Center Stage.
Thanks so much.
So let's start with ICE. For viewers outside the United States, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. These are the guys who we've seen with masks on at schools, churches, picking people up in the streets, taking them into custody. They are doing this with not just the backing of the federal government, but at the request of the federal government. This is America 2025. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is overwhelming. It's overwhelming for immigrant communities, but it's also overwhelming for everyday Americans. This has always been a country that's thought of itself as a nation of immigrants. And despite that history, we are seeing an administration pursue a policy that cracks down on people living in our communities, many of whom have been here for decades, who are contributing richly to our local economies, raising their families. And that kind of immigration agenda is unprecedented for this country. And that is what people are feeling, is that terror, that confusion, and some of that shock. And some of that is the point here. That's the point of an agenda like this.
There's one word here that's really crucial, and that is illegal. So some people will refer to these people as undocumented migrants. The Trump administration is very clear. It calls them illegal aliens. Where do you stand on this issue? Where's the legality?
Yeah, so the first thing is that we are living in a country where there are about 13 to 15 million undocumented people, 80% of whom have been here for 10 years or longer. It is absolutely true that these are folks who are in violation of civil immigration law. Being undocumented is a civil offense, a violation of civil law. It is not a criminal offense. That is the first thing this administration has confused for the American public. But nevertheless, yes, these are people in violation of immigration law who have been waiting for a way to get right with the law, to follow the rules. But they have been unable to do that because Congress for 30 years has failed to give them a pathway to that kind of status. Now, in the meantime, these are folks who are contributing every day to our country. One thing a lot of folks don't know is that undocumented immigrants pay, in 2022, for example, $97 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. They represent 1 in 7 workers in construction and agriculture. They're a core component of the healthcare industry. They are raising hundreds of thousands of US citizens. They are very much a part of our everyday fabric. We can have consequences for violations of civil law, but the consequences we're talking about here are extremely punitive. They're disproportionate. This is about detaining and deporting people who pose no public safety threat and are just waiting for a way to get right with the law.
I mean, it's a fully funded part of the administration. And in fact, there was a funding bill that was passed recently that's given them a huge amount of extra money to enhance their operations. They've had a massive recruitment drive. I mean, I've seen adverts on X, and I heard a figure from the deputy director saying that they've had 150,000 applicants. So it's obviously, it's operating very well in the government's eyes. And they've got this quota, was it 3,000 a day? I can't see any of this changing soon, can you? At least for the next 3.5 years.
Yeah, so, the Big Beautiful Bill Act that Congress passed and Trump signed into law gives $30 billion to the immigration enforcement agencies just for these kinds of arrests and raids. It gives another $45 billion to expand the immigration detention system. So this is now a sub-agency within the Department of Homeland Security that is funded at extreme levels, at unprecedented numbers that we've never seen before. And the only priority they've been given is to arrest 3,000 immigrants a day, a quota, as you say. Now, everyday people, immigrant communities might experience the actions of ICE as being illegitimate, unwanted, unpopular. But they are doing exactly what they are being told by a president who was elected by the American people, and they are doing it with dollars handed to them by Congress. And so in that sense, they do feel they have legitimate authority to be enforcing the law in the way that they are. And ultimately, a pushback on their tactics will have to mean rolling back that amount of money they've been given, making reforms at the federal level to what ICE is supposed to be doing in our communities. But right now, the agenda that they're pursuing is the one that this president ran on when he ran to be president.
Americans appear to be tolerating it. I mean, there will be areas where they're not. For example, think of Los Angeles back in June when we saw these huge protests. And you'd expect that in maybe Los Angeles, democratic city, huge migrant population. But on the whole, people don't seem to be completely against what ICE is doing as long as it's fulfilling an election promise, or are they?
So this is where the administration is playing intentional games. They are purposely targeting quote unquote blue cities, urban areas with high populations of immigrant communities that have usually had protective policies and laws for immigrants. They are terrorizing those communities, and people living there notice it. In other parts of the country, people aren't seeing law enforcement agents flooding their neighborhoods. They're not seeing military cracking down on immigrants. They may not be so directly exposed to the worst harms of what's happening. And the administration is intentionally targeting places in a way that pulls apart the fabric and unity that we have in this country. So, it is intentional, the way in which they're going about immigration enforcement when it comes to how politics play out and where they have support. That's the first thing. The second is, there has been polling along the way suggesting that a majority of Americans support mass deportation. The problem is, most Americans didn't understand what mass deportation means. You can ask somebody, do you support mass deportation and getting rid of criminals in our communities? Yes, I don't want to feel unsafe in my community, most Americans would say. But if you follow up and you say, do you support military tanks and armed officers on every street corner? The answer is no. Do you support your favorite restaurant owner who runs the pancake house you've been going to with your kids every weekend being pulled out of work and never returning? You'd say no. The point here is, what are the facts that are being presented, and how close are everyday Americans to actually what's happening on the ground?
I mean, those mass deportations signs, I went to many Trump events in the lead up to the election back in 2024. There were lots of those at the Trump rallies. But he would say on stage, I'm going to get rid of the thieves, the rapists, the murderers. Those are the people that we're going to be targeting. And he did well with Latino voters as well, despite saying this, despite many of those migrants being from Latino countries. Tom Homan, who is his border czar, says the majority of people who've been picked up are criminals, right? You will get some collateral damage around the edges, people who get swept up, who then they find out shouldn't be here, but the majority are criminals. Is that a fair assessment?
No, it is not a fair assessment. The vast majority of people locked up right now pose no public safety threat. Criminality amongst immigrants is much lower than the US-born population. So there are not even enough people who have contact with the criminal legal system to meet a 3,000 arrest per day goal. And so necessarily they will have to sweep in people who pose absolutely no public safety threat.
So let's talk about then what happens when somebody gets picked up. You might look at this and think, America, first world nation, very organized. There'll be a process. What is the journey when somebody gets detained by an ICE officer, and where do they end up?
Generally speaking, somebody who is apprehended by civil immigration enforcement agents, whether that's in their community and neighborhood or as a handoff from local police to federal agents, that person is usually given a piece of paper that says, you are being put into immigration removal proceedings. We are accusing you of being in violation of immigration law. And that person might be detained in an immigration detention facility, or they might not be. Under this administration, almost everybody arrested is initially being detained. In terms of the process, once somebody is picked up by ICE and ICE makes the decision to keep them incarcerated, detained, they could be sent to a facility thousands of miles from their community. I could be arrested by ICE here in Washington, D.C., and sent to an immigration jail in Louisiana. There has been an expansion, an explosion of immigration detention facilities in the South and the Southeast, and we are seeing this administration routinely transfer people who are picked up all around the country to facilities anywhere in America.
Is that a deliberate strategy, do you think, to put them in Republican-led red areas where there may be less pushback?
In some instances, it's deliberate, not so much for political reasons, but for legal reasons. Often, where a person is detained dictates which federal court of appeals is the authority court in their legal proceeding. And in certain parts of the country where there are more conservative courts at the federal level, it is in DHS's interest to pursue those immigration cases in those jurisdictions. So, when the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil happened, he was transferred from New York to Louisiana, and the federal government argued that the jurisdiction that should apply would be the law there in Louisiana versus in New York where he lived. So at times it's strategic. It's also the case that even before the Trump administration, ICE has routinely transferred people across immigration detention facilities. What is different under this administration is that most of the people today who are in immigration detention do not have access to a bond hearing, which means they don't get to go before a judge and make a case for their release. The process that people who are being arrested are facing right now is terrifying, because an arrest on the street means you might be indefinitely locked up for weeks or months, and it's unclear whether you'll be able to make a phone call or whether you'll get a day in court to ask for your release while you fight your case.
And speaking of where people are locked up, so the most infamous that I can think of is Alligator Alcatraz. For viewers who don't remember this was this temporary facility about an hour's drive west of Miami in the middle of the Everglades, middle of nowhere, where it was set up on an old disused airport. The idea being that people would be kept there. It was surrounded by alligators, so there was a natural deterrent, so people wouldn't escape. And it was like a one-stop shop, wasn't it? They could be driven in, processed, and then flown straight out without ever having to leave. But it got the headlines. So those on the left, they were absolutely horrified. Those on the right were like, this is great. Surely we're going to see more of these places springing up. And that must be a massive concern for you.
Yeah, so there are multiple concerns, right, with a place like this. The first, to your point, is that this is the administration once again using political theater. They're using alliterative, dehumanizing names for carceral facilities for people who mostly pose no public safety threat.
It was literally theater. I mean, I remember covering this, and that there was almost like a movie trailer from the Attorney General of Florida set against rock music, like a movie trailer.
Yes, and DHS social media posts with photos of alligators. That is obviously political theater, but it has a terrifying, intimidating effect on immigrants who live in Florida, a state, by the way, that is driven by the contributions of both legal and undocumented immigrants. And so the first concern is the theater and the tactics around talking about a facility like this. The second is that they built this facility in horrific environmental conditions as a way to essentially pressure people who are put into that facility to accept deportation. If you are in a facility with extreme heat conditions and you don't have access to a lawyer, you are likely to say, you know what, just get me out of here, deport me, even if you have a viable legal claim to stay here in the US. And that is a second concerning intentional part of a facility like this. A third that is not as reported on is that what was unprecedented was that this was the state of Florida taking immigration detention, which is a federal matter, into its own hands. This is a facility the governor of Florida and the state of Florida was willing to build on its own to show some kind of loyalty to President Trump and the mass deportation agenda. And a few of the lawsuits that have been filed against this particular facility in the Everglades have been focused on the fact that they don't even have viable legal authority to build their own facility in the manner that they're claiming.
For context, we've got to point out to viewers outside the US that Florida has a Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, who himself tried to become president, reportedly is mulling a second attempt after Trump leaves. And this obviously plays very well into the narrative in a very Republican state to go after migrants. And perhaps that might be part of the motivation behind this. It might be unpalatable to you, but it might be worth saying, despite the fact that this is putting fear into the community, if it's working and it's getting people to self-deport and leave, it's a strategy that's working, isn't it?
So it depends what working means. Yeah, if working means arresting 3,000 people a day and deporting 1 million people, then it's working. But what Americans and anybody around the world has to understand is the very heavy economic toll an agenda like this is going to take. It is already hurting local economies around the country. Farmers are not showing up to work in Florida, California, Iowa. We know that people are afraid to go to work given increases in worksite enforcement. When you push people to self-deport, when you use terms like Alligator Alcatraz, there is a chilling effect. And given the contributions that immigrants make, particularly to economies like the one in Miami, the hospitality industry, to other cities in Florida that live on tourism, those effects are going to be real for all Americans. The other point is this is an agenda that really undermines public safety. That is the irony. They are using public safety as a pretext when in fact it's mass deportation itself that makes Americans less safe. They are asking federal agents from the FBI, from DEA, from local police departments, all to redirect and focus on low-level immigration arrests instead of on high public safety priority issues like drug trafficking, political violence, domestic terrorism. So even if an everyday American doesn't feel an empathy for the immigrant who's terrorized, they certainly care about the cost of their fruit and vegetables and eggs. They certainly care about growing political violence in our communities. And those are actually effects of this agenda.
And how is that being reflected with the president? Because you remember back in June, we saw those images of farmland in Ventura County, California, where workers were being chased. ICE vans pulled up and they just chased workers through the field and then they wouldn't come back. And then the president, I think it was the next day or maybe it was the day after, said, okay, we're going to look at maybe not doing this. Has he followed through on that? Are they still targeting workers?
Yeah, so the White House is hearing complaints, again, from farmers, from employers, from businesses who are all feeling the impact of this agenda for their bottom lines. And the president heard that the ICE agents themselves who were enforcing in LA these raids, the hotel they were staying at, the workers at that hotel didn't show up to work. They were so scared because those ICE officers were staying there. And the White House and the president were informed of that. And they were informed of the complaints of farmers and employers. And so the president tweeted or posted on social media, actually, we won't focus on people in the hospitality and agricultural industry, which suggests that he understood the negative economic effects this could have. But within 48 hours of posting that, the administration quickly walked it back. And we saw Stephen Miller in the White House, DHS Secretary Noem, make clear that, in fact, they would be leaning in on worksite enforcement. And just this month, we saw the administration initiate a raid in Georgia at a Hyundai plant that essentially sparked a political diplomatic incident, arresting 500 workers, the largest single-site worksite raid in DHS's history. They are leaning into that worksite enforcement, which, to your point, suggests that the president is unwilling to stand up for those industries, even when he's hearing complaints from those leaders who aren't traditional allies of immigrant communities, but are concerned with the economic impact of mass deportation.
So what's the tipping point then? Because it sounds like there's been a slight gradual climb towards it, but it hasn't been reached yet, where Donald Trump has to listen to people on his own side who are saying, enough's enough, stop it.
We hope there's a tipping point, given the destruction this is imposing on so many parts of our country. I think the reality is that there are hardliners on the far right of the Republican Party who truly believe in an anti-immigrant, fully restrictive, xenophobic agenda. These are the folks who have advocated for revocations of legal immigrant pathways and legal immigrant visas, who are willing to go the fullest extent to sanitize the United States of immigrants, even though we are a country of immigrants. If those hardliners continue to lead this agenda, it will be harder to imagine a tipping point where the president is willing to pull back on what we're seeing. On the other hand, there are a growing set of voices in the Republican Party in Congress who are concerned with these effects. There are elected officials hearing from business leaders in their community saying, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? This is not helping us. This is hurting us. I thought they were going after criminals. My workers are not criminals. They show up every day and work hard for my business. And those members of Congress are waiting for a political opening and for political cover to be able to say publicly, we want something less extreme than this.
Do you think the general public in the United States is aware of the full picture? And the reason I say that is because you think about how we consume news now. It's online, it's fed by algorithms that show us what we want to see and what's going to keep us engaged.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely one of our biggest challenges here is sharing facts and information. And that is,
Well, you've got facts and you've got alternative facts as well, which is the phrase that's being used.
yeah, there are alternative facts, there's disinformation, there's confusion. We're seeing this administration try to control the exercise of free speech. And that is a real barrier in trying to push back on an agenda like this, which is why when, stories like the one covered by the New York Times, where there's, a woman named Carol who works at the local waffle and pancake house, who's a soccer mom, is suddenly swept away, and a Trump supporting community in Missouri is out on the street with posters demanding to bring her home, there's a moment of hope that even Americans who thought they supported this are starting to see that when they see it up close, it doesn't make sense to our values. We have to hope that there are more moments like that and that we can amplify them, that we can break through the silos that we're seeing in media.
We have to take what officials tell us at face value, and that line that they've had 157,000 applicants, people wanting to join ICE, must show that people feel compelled that they want to help the government's efforts, though, right?
Are they compelled to help, or are they compelled by the $50,000 signing bonuses that they receive when they sign up for ICE, given this new bill that's passed Congress? With the funding that ICE has been given, they can afford to hire 10,000 new ICE agents. They can afford to offer $50,000 signing bonuses and to pay ICE agents more money than we pay school teachers in our country. Of course, some of the people signing up for this are people who are gung-ho supporters of an anti-immigrant white nationalist agenda. Others are people who are looking to be hired and earn money, given that we're in an economy where people are losing jobs left and right. And so it's important to be pragmatic in understanding what's happening here when we see all these people lining up to work for ICE.
It's important to note as well that some of the people who've been arrested by ICE have been at immigration centers where they've been turning up as planned to their interviews or their appointments that they can't miss, because then they would be in violation. And they've been getting arrested at those hearings and at those appointments. And so some people have stopped going to those, which then, I don't know if that is a legal gray area. Does that then make them guilty of something illegal? or are they still in violation of civil penalties?
I mean, so this is the thing. The day after, or the week after the White House announced this quota of 3,000 immigration arrests a day, we suddenly saw ICE at immigration courthouses. As you say, these are people dutifully showing up for their court hearings as required. Immigration judges facing pressure from the White House, facing pressure from politicals, started dismissing cases so that ICE could immediately arrest those people. Now, if this was an administration that actually cared about people following the rules, you would imagine that they would be rewarding the people following the rules, not scaring them away from doing so or disincentivizing people to show up to court for their hearings. That underscores the hypocrisy of this agenda.
Final thought from you then. So Donald Trump can't run for president again, apparently, although there has been rumors that perhaps there may be an attempt to try to do that somehow. But midterms are next. So you can expect there to be a lot more political rhetoric from the Republicans as they try to shore up their base. J.D. Vance, vice president, reportedly eyeing up a run if he gets Donald Trump's endorsement in 2028. Where's this all go? Where does this all end up?
Yeah, I mean, it will be up to Americans. Do we want to continue down a path of an entirely broken immigration system now that comes at the cost of all of these other things, our safety, our economic interests, our social fabric, our communities? Or are we willing to elect leaders who talk practically about solutions and reform, who are willing to find a middle ground between the left and the right and depoliticize this issue so that we can actually move forward? And that is a question for American voters.
Fascinating stuff. Nayna Gupta, thank you very much for joining us here
so
on
much.
Center Stage.
Thank you.